guys. Thank you so much for coming to my session. My name is Tim Hamilton. I'm the founder and CEO of Astonish Design. We are a Drupal consultancy in Austin, Texas. We work with growing and progressive organizations to develop web applications and websites that help them to be more successful, to grow more effectively, and to achieve their most strategic objectives. And the presentation that I'm interested in giving today is about sales. More specifically, it's about how to seal the deal and close a sale without writing a proposal. And I've got a very personal reason why this is very, very important to me. And I can tell you guys a story to kind of illustrate it. I started Astonish in 2000, 12 years ago, and I was working with an organization in 2005. We worked together for about 3 years, and we did some really, really good work together, and they were very, very happy with what we did. I got a call from the president of the organization in 2008 saying, you know what, we'd like to do a pretty big redo of our website, a larger project, and we'd really like to get your thoughts and recommendations on how to do it. Can you send us a proposal? We want to completely redo the website. Well, I was really excited about it. I thought Drupal was going to be a really good fit for it, and I said, you know what, absolutely, I'd be happy to. And I routinely spent 15 or 20, sometimes 25 hours on a proposal. And in this particular case, this was a long-standing client. I was excited about using Drupal to solve their pains, and I went to town. And I wrote probably a 10, 12, 13-page proposal, and I was really proud of it. I packaged it up and sent it off. And I didn't hear back. I emailed it to him, and I didn't follow up with a phone call. A couple days went by, 3, 4 days, and I sent an email, but I didn't hear anything back. He'd sort of disappeared and was hiding from me. I don't know if any of you guys have had this experience. Well, this wasn't the first time it had happened to me. It seemed like it was a pattern, but I'd also kind of given in. It also sort of seemed like this was the way. This is kind of the way things happened. Well, a few more days went by on this deal, and finally got a letter in the mail from the organization, and that was kind of odd because we didn't communicate by snail mail. We're pretty, like I said, a pretty close working relationship. I opened the letter, and it addressed me, "Dear vendor," and that was really odd. I didn't quite know what to think about that, and I read on, and they said, "We'd like to invite you to bid on this project that we have, and please review the RFP and the pages that have been attached." And I turned the page, and I saw my proposal that I wrote, and they turned my proposal into an RFP, and they'd sent it back to me, and evidently many other vendors as well, and I was stunned, and perhaps I was just naive. It was quite a wake-up call, and so that's why I'm presenting on the subject today, because that was a very, very painful experience back in 2008. I really started exploring this idea of why this was happening, and there ought to be a better way. But the funny thing is, the story's not done yet. I got that RFP back in the mail, and I said, well, evidently my first proposal just wasn't good enough. And so what I did is I decided that I was going to write the proposal of all proposals, and instead of investing 20 hours or 25 hours, again, this is a bit embarrassing, guys, I made a budget of like 100 and 150 hours, and this is like pretty routine. I was really, really hungry. And this is a picture of the first page. It's an 11 by 17 inch proposal, and I wanted to demonstrate to these people that we built the site that they were asking for 20 times. I mean, these are 20 screenshots of other sites that match exactly the spec that they're looking for. We've done this 20 times. I went further to illustrate sort of a features and a benefits grid, the user stories of the site that we'd be building in the different categories and the different user classes along the x-axis there. I even put together a proposed sitemap for the site, and again, I knew this client really well. We've been working together for 3 years, so I figured I'd got a leg up and a competitive advantage. And finally, I needed a fourth page right on the back side of the 11 by 17 inch presentation, so I put together a really detailed feature description and specification. And I got ready to go up to present to this client, and there was a board of 10 or 12 or 13 members that were making a decision about this, and I walked in all dressed up in a suit, had driven 3 or 4 hours to go and meet with them, delivered my presentation, and I just knew I was going to win this deal. I mean, who is going to go to this length to create a proposal like this? I mean, none of my competitors stood a chance. And I delivered the presentation. I thought I'd really engaged and really had landed the deal. And I was driving back, just excited as can be, jamming out my stereo. I was just convinced, driving back to Austin. And I finally got a call back from the president, and I picked up my phone with a lot of anticipation, really excited to just get started and celebrate the win, and great, looking forward to getting going next Monday. And he said, geez, Tim, you did a really good job, and we really appreciate you going to all that time. And I mean, as soon as you guys hear that, you know what's coming, right? They're buttering you up. And again, I think I'm still pretty naive at this point, and I'm like, optimism, like, let's keep a positive attitude. And then it finally came. He's like, yeah, we've decided to go with another vendor. And I felt like I'd had the wind knocked out of me. I mean, how can they do, anyway. So not only did I win the deal, I didn't win the deal that day, I also lost a client. And it was pretty painful, but I'm glad it happened, because it really got me thinking, because there is, in fact, a better way. And I'm really excited to share that better way with you today. It's been a journey for me about 3 years. I continue to study this week after week after week. It's really turned into an area of passion for me. And it all begins with the idea that when I sell with a system, I do better. I'm more effective. Just like if y'all develop with a system, we're better developers, we're better service providers if there's a system. This is a photo I took this year in Seattle. I just wanted to play with a long exposure, and I sort of felt a little bit like this after I sold that deal attempted to sell that deal in 2008, right? I was following, who was I following? The prospect's lead. I absolutely was not a leader in that transaction. And that is a huge problem. And if we don't have a system as salespeople, how can we become the leader in our sales transactions? We can't. I got married about 1.5 years ago, and my wife Christy and I went to Hyatt Lost Pines Resort in Texas, in Central Texas, to celebrate our 1-year anniversary. And one of the days we wanted to go hit a bucket of balls on the driving range. And this was the best. I mean, I hit maybe 400, 300 balls that day. This was the only one that actually really went anywhere. And it was an awesome shot. I mean, you can see the ball going. It was an awesome photo that Christy took. But look at where my head is at. Where's my head? Is it on the ball, or is it on where the ball was? Where it's going, right? It's not where it's going. It's where it was when I hit it. And every other photograph, my head was like looking where the ball was going to be. And the whole idea here is that we're going to be much more successful if we focus and become emotionally invested in the process, committed to the process of selling and not on the outcome of selling. I became emotionally committed to the outcome in that 2008 deal, right? I was completely emotionally invested, which is why I invested those 100 hours or so into it. And so this is the process, or so the conventional process. There's a process that conventional sales programs teach us. And conventional sales programs teach us that as a salesperson, you need to first understand the prospect's requirements. It's called a needs analysis. We've all heard of that before. And once you thoroughly understand their needs, you go through and you do a features and a benefits dog and pony show, right? You do a demo, you talk about the virtues of Drupal, you talk about this module and that module, the benefits of open source, and you're doing it positively or negatively. You're being enthusiastic. In most cases, as a salesperson, you'd be really enthusiastic if you think about a conventional salesperson. The next thing is you got to ask for the sale, right? Sir, what do I got to do to get you in this car today? And then finally, you got to overcome objections. Now, the process that I'm showing you today is not the answer. This is what we've been taught, but it's broken, it's flawed, it doesn't actually work. It actually, it's cheesy and it's sleazy and it drives prospects away. Turns out, prospects also have a system. That lines up really nicely. So it begins, and you know what? Prospects are not bad people. They are not. I want to make that clear. I love my customers and I love prospects. I love the people that are hiring us to do this work. They're good people and they have really good, worthwhile objectives. I'm guilty of this as well. I do this to people unknowingly, and I've tried to reverse that behavior. But this is typically how it starts out. Ever had a prospect say, you know what, Mr. Vendor, I'm really, really excited to work with you, and this is just the first of many projects we're going to do together. We have, I don't know how many millions of dollars to spend with you, but let's just get the first one under our wing, right? And then they gather information, right? This is also called free consulting. Can you give us a demo? Maybe could you write us a proposal? Can you just put that into a concept mock-up? We just kind of want to get a sense of what the artwork is going to look like. Just don't make it too detailed. High level is fine. You present the wireframes and the mock-ups and the sitemaps just like that 4-page proposal I did, and they say what? Well, you know what? Let me sit down with the board, review this, and I'll get back to you. Maybe you know, don't call me, I'll call you. And then they give you false hope, right? This looks great, I'll get back to you. And again, they do this because they're too polite to tell us no. It feels uncomfortable to say no to a salesperson. You feel bad because you know they've put the effort in. And then the last step of their process is they hide. Well, if they're good people, why do they do this? And I'll own up to it. Like I said, I do it as well. And so why do we mislead? And why do we give false hope? And why do we say, I'll think it over when we really mean no? Well, there's a really good answer. And I can illustrate it with a question. Think about the last time you went to a department store to buy something. Like you actually wanted to buy, you'd done the research on Amazon or whatever, and Best Buy had the best deal. And you went to Best Buy, and let's just say they had a greeter there that welcomed you into the store and said, hey there, ma'am, welcome to the store today. Can I help you? What are you going to say? No thanks, I'm just looking. Right? I'm just there to look. No thanks. And oh, really? Right. No thanks, I'm just looking. And they're extra polite, maybe depending on what part of the country you live in. But essentially the message is, I don't want to be a jerk, but no, I don't want to be sold. And that's essentially the message. That's why prospects have a tough time being honest with us, is that they don't want to be sold and they don't want to be a jerk. So the solution is, I found a company and a whole bunch of material and theory that's written by an organization called the Sandler Sales Institute. This is not my original idea. I cannot take credit for it. This is just something I'm really excited about. And I'll share the contact information with you guys so that you can look it up more in detail if you're interested. But the premise essentially starts out with the idea that in every sales opportunity, in every single sales transaction, 2 people win, which is a little counterintuitive. I always thought one person won, but it's in fact 2 people. It's the guy, obviously, that won the deal. That's intuitive. The second winner is the guy that got to know first before wasting any time or spending any time on the deal. If he wasn't going to be a good fit, he got to know maybe with 15 minutes invested or 20 or 30 minutes invested. So my question to you is, if you're not going to be this guy, wouldn't you rather be this guy? So here are the rules. Qualify hard and sell easy. During your sales discussions, make it okay, make it acceptable, create the space in your conversation to get to know this isn't a good fit before you write a proposal. And you know what? No is it's a bilateral outcome. No, it may not be a good fit for my firm is actually one of the outcomes, and my customer or prospect may decide that no, it's not a good fit for them either. But all too often, I think we consider it a unilateral outcome, that no is really the only decision the prospect can make and that we're not deciding yes or no. And that's actually a really, really powerful thing to recognize, that no is a two-way street. And the second thing is, before you write the proposal, get to yes. That would save us a whole bunch of time. And the process is illustrated up at the top. This is the new process, right? This is the right one that replaces the old outdated process. It's I've abridged it down to 6 steps. It's a 7-step process, but we'll go through 6 today. And it all starts out with a disarmingly honest conversation. Disarmingly honest conversation is what I mean by that is it's an upfront agreement. Okay, and so what I'm going to go through today is, well, in this next step is in your first phone call or face-to-face meeting, when you first sit down to interact with the prospect, this is the process that you should go through to set the stage for a disarmingly honest conversation. It has 5 pieces. One is you got to cover the time and purpose of the meeting today. And by time I mean, look, I blocked out an hour. Does that still work with your schedule? All too often I've sat down in front of a prospect for an hour-long meeting and I got cut off at 20 minutes, or they answered their phone at 45 minutes, or they stood up and they read email while I was there. Has that ever happened to y'all? So that's point number one. Point number two is, Mr. Prospect, what is your agenda? Some things that you're really hoping we cover during our time today. Point number three is your agenda, and I'll share with you in a bit. Your agenda is essentially to ask a whole bunch of questions. And they're very specific and special kind of questions, and I'll go through those in a bit. The last 2 points are really, really important, and it's creating the space and the agreement that a yes outcome is okay and a no outcome is okay. Do you guys know what I mean by a yes and a no outcome? Okay, so if I put all these together, it sounds a little bit like this. Gee, Mr. Prospect, I really appreciate you having me over to your office today. I understand we're going to be talking about your Drupal 6 site that you'd like to get upgraded to Drupal 7. I have an hour on the calendar today. Does that still work for your schedule? And he'll say yes. And I'll say, do you think there might be any interruptions that we ought to know about, or any risk that we might get cut short? And they'll say no, or they'll think about it and maybe be honest with you. And if there is a risk, then at least you know about it. During our time together, I want to make the best use of our time together. What are some of the things that at the top of your list that you want to make sure we cover? Some questions that you have coming into the meeting today. And ordinarily, they're going to want to know about what? Budget, timeline, capabilities, your team size, what you can do, and have you done any projects like this in the past? And you'll say, great, I get those questions a lot, and I'm happy to go through those. And so that I can answer them with the most accuracy, I'll have a lot of questions to ask you to really understand the role that this technology plays in your business. It may be more questions than you're accustomed to, actually. Are you comfortable with that? And so that's me setting my agenda. And notice by saying, are you comfortable with that, I'm managing their feelings very, very deliberately. I'm really trying to stay in tune with if they're feeling okay or not okay. And the last step of the process is, okay, Mr. Prospect, one of two things can typically happen after a meeting like this. One is, you know what, we decide that there's a really good fit here, and there's a lot of chemistry. We're having a really productive conversation. And typically when that happens, it means that a next step can sometimes consist of a follow-up interview, maybe a phone call or an in-person meeting. You know, some people are ready to go straight to a contract and an agreement and get the project started. I don't know where you fall on that, but would it be okay if we reserve 5 minutes at the end of the discussion today to talk about how we start doing business together? We're not there yet, but assuming that yes is the outcome, are you comfortable with that? And they say sure. And then you say, okay, well, the other thing that can happen is we determine that we don't have a fit. And you know, it could happen, Mr. Prospect, that I determine or I get the feeling that what we do, what we're really strong at, doesn't perfectly match with what you're looking for. If I come to that conclusion, would I hurt your feelings or upset you or offend you if I shared that concern? And this is going to make them sit back in their chair. I mean, they've never heard this before. It's a pattern interrupt, and the results are quite remarkable. And they'll say, well, no, I'd actually appreciate you to be honest. I'd welcome that. And then the second thing is, well, you know, at any point in time, Mr. Prospect, if you determine that we're not a good fit for you, would you feel comfortable telling me that honestly? And he says, oh, sure, I'll tell you honestly. And then you say, you know, I appreciate you telling me that. I find a lot of people are just too darn nice to tell me no, and I want to make sure that you know you wouldn't hurt my feelings. I hope it doesn't happen that way. I'd love to do business. I'd like to have us do business together, but be honest with me if the answer is no. And so what we've covered here is we've really talked about all the sort of 800-pound gorilla type issues in the room in the very, very beginning of the conversation. You can also think of this as diffusing the bomb early. If anything's going to go wrong, you want it to happen at the beginning of the conversation, right? You want to be the guy that gets to know first. So we've covered a no is okay, a yes is okay. We've made a bilateral agreement to decide about the next step at the end of the process. And we've got a commitment to really, really clear outcomes. This is a pretty powerful first step to make. The second step is the pain step. And so pain is the real key to help you focusing your questions during the interview when you're interviewing this prospect. And the reason why pain is important is it's the biggest driving force, the largest contributor to the actual decision-making driving force that's out there. And a lot of people don't want to share pain with you, but the way I define pain is where the prospect is now, and it's the gap between where they are now and where they want to be. So I have a long list of reasons why pain is important. And we can go into more detail on these, but for time, there are really two main reasons why you should go into pain. to satisfy your prospect's needs and to satisfy your needs, the prospect's needs is to know whether or not this guy even understands my business. The number one hindering factor, apparently, in companies that are looking to hire a consultant is a concern that the consultant doesn't, in fact, understand my business. This is documented and proven in a really pretty extensive research study. They are concerned that you just don't understand their business. And I know my prospects feel that concern when they first meet me. I'm a perfect stranger. And so by really asking these 3 levels of pain questions, which we'll go into, you gain an understanding, a very intimate understanding of the real driving forces, and you actually differentiate yourself much more effectively than the competition. And the second reason is, at the end of the day, what we need to qualify hard is to establish an economic basis for budget, to know whether or not we're even a possible fit for this prospect. So a great example of this is to think about how doctors sell. If you think about, I'll tell you a story here. If you think about a guy, let's say in his late 40s, early 50s, and he hasn't gone to have a physical exam in 10 years, and he's not excited about going to get a physical exam. His family's convinced him to go do it. He gets in his car and really begrudgingly, he's dreading the cost. It's going to be like $500. He drives to the doctor's office. It's half a day out of his schedule. He sits down and he goes through the physical 2-3 hours, and he's sitting waiting for the results. And he's irritated. You know, he's having to spend the $500, and he's really resenting that. The doctor comes in and puts the scan up on the wall and says, you know, I don't like what I see, but can you tell me, have you had any history of cancer in your family? Can you just imagine where this guy has gone from feeling bad or resentful about spending $500? Where is he now? He's gone no amount of money, right? He's gone to from $500 to blank check, and I'm not saying use this technique to you know, be an extortionist. I'm just saying get down to the real issue, because a lot of the times prospects aren't aware of their real pain. And that's one of the greatest values as consultants and experts in our business, that we can help them to understand. We can help them get to the real pain. And the key is to focus on their pain and not on your features and benefits, right? If you go in to talk to a guy who owns a building that is on fire, you may be there to sell him flame retardant window shades and coverings and curtains, and oh my goodness, Mr. Prospect, these flame retardant window coverings have some really nice textures. They're going to go really well with your interior decor. It's really going to do a good job for your hotel. Meanwhile, his top floor is burning down, right? You're focusing on your features and benefits. Where's his mind at? He's on his pain, right? Even though you're selling in the same sort of industry vertical, we do this with Drupal all the time. I do it. I'm guilty of this. I say, look, you know, the Omega theme and mobile this and mobile that and responsive is just fantastic. And did you know that we've seen clients having up to 30 or 40% of their traffic coming from mobile devices? If they don't know about mobile or don't care about mobile, this is like, I'm doing this. I'm guilty of this. And so before I start talking about features and benefits and virtues of Drupal this and Drupal that, I really seek to understand their pain. I had an activity planned, which we're going to skip for time, and if we have time, we'll come back to it to kind of illustrate this. But what prospects do to kind of make this difficult is they actually have a whole bunch of questions to ask you. These are some of the questions that I get asked all the time, like how big is your team? Have you done something like this before? Have you worked with other companies like us? And these are actually these are potholes. These are mines in the field there that you can step on. And I put my foot in my mouth all the time by answering these questions. And the reason it's dangerous is because, for example, if you take this question, have you done something like this before? What could that mean? It could mean maybe 1, 2, or 3 different types of things. And depending on your response to it, you could really step on a mine or come out a hero. And so the technique before answering a question is to reverse a question. And it's important to do this because you keep the focus on the prospect, and you help them to really understand, well, you help to understand really what they really mean with a question. And by reversing, I mean turn their question into a question. But there's a technique that's really important. So if somebody says, have you done any work like this before? If I were to respond to that question with a question and just say, well, why? I'm going to lose rapport with that person real quick. That's a really rude response, and they're not going to like it at all. I'm going to be lost. And so you got to nurture it first. So if somebody says, have you done work for other companies in my industry, say, you got to nurture it first. That's a really good question, Mr. Prospect. I've actually heard that one a few times. So that's the nurture. That's like laying down a mattress, softening it up. And then you reverse. Different people mean different things when they ask me that question, and some are more concerned that we might take their trade secrets and share them with competitors, their secrets, and others are really looking to find a partner who focuses on an industry vertical and who's been there and done that. On that spectrum, Mr. Prospect, about where do you fall? So all of a sudden, you've diffused this bomb, right? You've understood where the obstacles are, and you're going to get to the real meaning of the prospect's question. Does this make sense to you guys? I'll do a couple more. Have you ever been asked, can you give a guarantee? It's one of my favorite questions. To nurture it, right? You say, that's a good question. You make them feel okay for asking it. And we can definitely talk about guarantees. But sometimes when people ask that, it typically means they've been really badly burned by somebody in my industry. Can we talk about that? And so what I'm doing there is I'm digging for pain, and I'm at least opening up the opportunity for them to talk about the real issue. Because I know that I'm going to be more likely to ask a vendor for a guarantee if I've been really badly burned, if I've skinned my knee a couple times. And so this helps keep the focus on the prospect and turn the attention away from you and onto them and really get down to the real issue. If you've ever been asked how big is your team, this could sometimes mean if they're really asking, are you offshoring overseas? It could mean, do you all work locally here in town? So you really should seek to understand the intent of the question before you answer it. Does that make sense? All right, the next step is the pendulum theory. Remember in the beginning of the presentation, I was going through the kind of the conventional sales process, and I asked you, how do most salespeople talk, and how do they're out and about in the world, they're very, very positive, enthusiastic. In fact, they're maybe borderline pushy. That's the stereotype at least. So the pendulum theory says that you should do exactly the opposite of what your stereotypical view of the salesperson is out there, because we all have that wall up. None of us want to be sold, right? And so if you go in there being too enthusiastic or too positive, that wall is going to come right up on the prospect, and you're not going to get to really connect with them. So you can use the pendulum theory to think about it. If you think about the prospect swinging from sort of the negative side of the conversation over to the positive side, or vice versa, in this model, you always want to stay to the negative side of the prospect. Slightly negative, never positive. You don't ever want to be pulling a prospect towards you. So if a prospect says to you, gee, Tim, I'd really like to get started today. The conventional salesman said, well, gee, I just happen to have my contract in my back pocket. I love my contract. Boom, there it is. Let's go ahead and sign on page 13. Right? That's really positive. I got a silver tongue. I'm slick. I'm on my game. If you're going to be on the negative side, you're going to sound a little bit more like, gee, Mr. Prospect, I appreciate you saying that. We'd love to win the business, but I just want to make sure that this is still a good fit for you. Have you really thought this through? Can we go through those points one more time? It's not crazy negative, but it's slightly more negative than the prospect. Does that make sense? What this does is it builds credibility and it builds trust, where it's a really, really important thing to do as a salesperson, right? Because we come into a context of distrust. So another example is, how much is this going to cost? This is a response or reverse that has a slight negative component to it. So that's a fair question, Mr. Prospect. That's my nurture. It's going to be a lot of money, maybe even more than you want to spend. Let's just say it came in around 30, and I know, for example, the prospect's budget is 25. So let's just say it came in around 30. I'm going negative. What would need to happen to give you the conviction to buy it? And this achieves two things. One, I'm going negative and building trust, and I'm being a realist, which most salespeople aren't. They're going to give you the good news. And number two is I'm really seeking to understand the source of true conviction, the real pain in this deal. A prospect may be asking you, can you finish it in 6 weeks? The negative reverse response to this is, let's pretend we couldn't. Would I be right in assuming that probably be a deal breaker for you? So this is a way of testing the prospect's questions to understand what is and what is not a deal breaker. Because a lot of these questions won't be. They'll be nice to haves. And in fact, by doing this, you can turn that nice to have into a kind of an asset in your court versus the competition, because you're having a disarmingly honest conversation. Okay, I want to reinforce and repeat here. This is not about manipulation. It's not about pulling a move. It is truly about having a disarmingly honest conversation, exploring fit, and finding out what's really important. And I really do believe that this benefits the salespeople as well as the prospect. We really get down to the heart of the matter. So there are 3 levels of pain: surface, business, and personal. And to be really effective, you want to get down to personal. You want to cover all three. And there's a technique called the sales funnel, or sales funnel. Sorry, the pain funnel. And you can go through a series of these questions here. So if a prospect says, well, gee, we're on Drupal 6, we really want to get to Drupal 7, we're having some performance issues with Drupal 6. You start off by saying, well, gee, tell me more about that. Can you give me an example of how that's affecting you? How long has this been a problem? That gives you a reading on urgency, right? If they've been dealing with a problem for 6 months, that tells you something versus 2 weeks. What have you tried to do about it? And did it work? How much do you think this issue has cost you? And so now you're starting to build an economic basis for budget. Very, very few of our prospects actually come to us with a very crystal clear idea of what the budget is, and they certainly don't want to share it with you, right? We'll get to that when we talk about money. But if you can help them to build an economic basis for a budget, then you can help them to become more rational about it. How do you feel about that? This is where I'm going into the personal impact, right? And what does it mean for, another one I could ask is, what does it mean for your job, your day-to-day? And have you given up trying to solve the problem? So this is a series of pain questions that you can ask to really effectively get at the issue. Okay, so my next point here is, how many of you guys use email to sell, to actually communicate with people throughout the sales process? Yeah, it's pretty common. And in my illustration here, I want to implore that you stop. If you read this statement, it could mean 2 or 3 or 4 different things, depending on which word I emphasize, depending on my verbal cues and hints, my intonation. So I could say, I did not say he beat his dog. 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 I did not say he beat his dog, beat his dog. So there's like all these different meanings, and that's what happens with email communication. In fact, interpersonal communication, the message that you're writing in email actually delivers only 7% of your intended meaning, which can get us in a lot of trouble. The tone of voice and also your body language are very significant and important contributors to delivering an effective message. And so if you heard in my earlier examples, my use of tone and nurturing, I was using my voice very deliberately to create a safe and open environment, and that's a really, really important thing for you to have control over. So my point there is, please stop using email to respond to even the most benign questions like, how big is your team? Because that's not what they mean. So my next point here is budget and money. Any of you guys ever feel like talking about budget or asking for budget puts you in a poker game with the prospect? I've noticed prospects get really defensive, really nervous, like they feel like I'm asking them to put their playing cards down on the table when I ask for their budget. So there's a technique I can share with you called bracketing, where as a salesperson, you say, look, Mr. Prospect, in round numbers, how much do you think a solution to this problem might cost you? And so the phrasing of this question is quite different than what's your budget, right? I'm saying in round numbers, so I'm making it a little safer for them to share it with me. And then, how much do you think a solution to your problem is? Not what your budget is. We got to solve the problem at the end of the day. And prospect will typically say, well, gee, I have no idea. That's why I'm talking to you. Or, I'm not comfortable sharing that information with you. Or, gee, I hadn't really given that any thought. So a good response as a salesperson is, typically solutions can range anywhere from 30 to 50,000, and others maybe from 50 to 60,000. Off the record, Mr. Prospect, do we need to be staying closer to the $30,000 to $50,000 range? So a couple important points here. Again, off the record is creating a safer context for the conversation. And you're going counterintuitively with the lower of the ranges. So you're giving them 2 brackets, and most people would expect a salesperson to go for the kill. They'd go for the higher range, right? So do exactly the opposite of what a conventional salesperson would do and go for the lower range. Does that make sense? That's how to talk about money. The other way to help with money is I have a lot of really well-meaning prospects and clients ask for the wireframes and the estimate and the plan and a lot of work before we even know if we're in the running for the project. It happens to us all the time, I think, in this industry in particular. And so there's an analogy that I can use. If you think about a big tanker pulling up to a harbor, and if you've ever looked at those massive mooring lines that secure that tanker onto the side of the dock, I have no idea how somebody could throw a line like that off the side of the boat. They're just, they're like that thick. You couldn't do it. And so there's a tool they use called a monkey's paw, which is a much lighter weight, thinner rope, and they tie that in a knot that has, it's got some weight to it, so you could throw the monkey's paw down to the deckhand. And then on the other side of that rope, they tie the massive mooring line onto the rope with the monkey's paw, get the monkey's paw down to the deckhand, who can then pull the bigger line down. Does that make sense? You can use this analogy for selling by charging for that first discovery and due diligence phase, right? So we can develop a deck of wireframes for you, Mr. Prospect. We can put the work in for you. We'll develop estimates. We'll develop a timeline, but typically it takes between 40 and 50 hours of engineering time. And it turns out more prospects are willing to pay for this counterintuitively than I was expecting, which was a nice surprise. And so I would say, stop giving away free consulting and use this technique to give them the alternative. So that's a couple notes on talking about money and budget. The next piece is the decision. You got to talk openly about the decision. And so this is your opportunity to understand, how is the decision made, who are the players, why is it made that way, where will it be made in the organization, and why is it made that way? And a really important part of this is understanding the cast of characters, right? You want to get to the decision maker at the end of the day, but you can step on a mine very easily by asking, well, who's going to be making the final decision on this? Because you're going to make the prospect feel like, well, gee, you know, I'm talking to you at the end of the day, aren't I? They're going to feel unimportant. And so you can word it a little differently. You can say, well, who other than yourself, Mr. Prospect, will you be involving in making this decision? And it becomes a lot easier to get at the real heart and the real truth of who's making the decision. And if they say, well, it's just me, you can say, well, that makes a lot of sense. Well, you mean there's no one else that you want to involve? I sometimes talk to prospects that need to pass this by IT or talk to their COO or maybe even review it with their spouse. None of those apply for you. And so you can really get at who's the true cast of characters. And once you understand, you need to negotiate for access to them. And so you say, well, gee, Mr. Prospect, I'd really like to sit down. Would it make any sense for us all to sit down and meet face to face so we really understand the true issues that play for everybody in the company? And they may say, no, I don't want to sit down and do that. You can talk to me. I'll answer their questions for you accurately. And you can reverse that while saying, I appreciate you, but my biggest concern is that we miss a really important detail that's important to Greg over in IT. You know, what would happen if Greg saw the proposal and really there was this one point that was glaringly omitted? How would that impact the deal? Again, it's about having the disarmingly honest conversation. If you feel it, say it. So also important to talk about is how will you be making this decision? Is it a toss of a coin? Is it a committee decision? You can also ask the question, at the end of the day, Mr. Prospect, is this decision going to come down to the lowest bidder? And I've asked that question many times, and it's actually quite a revealing question. You really get to the real decision drivers, the driving points of the decision, and again, get to learn a lot more about your prospect. So when a prospect asks you to send them a proposal, this is actually a really wonderful question to get. It's a golden opportunity. You can nurture and reverse it like this. So, you know, Mr. Prospect, I'd be happy to send you your proposal. And let's pretend I did, and you loved everything that was in it. It had the right budget that we talked about. It had the right features. It had all the items we discussed. What would happen then? And so this is the let's pretend technique, and you really get to see a clear outcome, a clear future. You're fighting for that clear future as opposed to the mystical one. So that's a really nice way of responding to a proposal. And I would implore that you not write a proposal or not agree to write a proposal until they tell you, well, we'd get started. If you gave me that proposal, we'd get started. And once you get that response for them, then I like to think of this as a collaborative proposal. I don't spend those 10 or 15 or 20 or goodness me, 150 hours on proposals anymore. And instead what I do is as I'm interviewing the client with my pain funnel questions, I'm taking notes voraciously. And I'm refactoring those pain funnel questions and the responses about their pain to write a situational appraisal and executive summary and a sort of a 10 or 12 or 13 point summary of a proposed solution. And then I fire up a GoToMeeting presentation, and I say, Mr. Prospect, let's review the draft of the proposal at Thursday, and we'll actually use GoToMeeting to review a draft. I'll have draft as a big watermark in the back of the document, and use GoToMeeting to go through it point by point. And I've had prospects correct me or add points. They help me build the case for the business. And just like if in the beginning of this presentation I said, okay, I'd like everyone to stand up. Can you all help me reorganize the chairs, bring them all forward? Can you guys help me move the table a little bit? there's research to show that you guys would be more attentive to the presentation as a result, because I've asked you to make an investment in the presentation. The same applies for a sale. If you invite and give a prospect an opportunity to make an investment in you, the statistics show that you're going to have a better outcome. So the components of the proposal, and remember that fear I shared with you guys is that people are concerned that you don't understand their business. The first and most important part of the proposal is to demonstrate that you get them and that you're a good listener. Use their pain words. Use the same words that they used when they were telling you about the fire on the 13th floor. Use those same words, and that's going to be in the executive summary or situational appraisal. Document the budget that you agreed on. Agree that you're going to get access to the decision makers to present the proposal, and the most important part of this is that you do not agree to write a proposal until they agree, again for the second or the third time perhaps, to give you a decision. And so sometimes how this sounds, in fact this happened pretty recently. I said I'd be happy to write a proposal, let's pretend I did, and blah blah blah, and then I said even if the determination and the decision at the end of the day is a no, would you feel comfortable with me, comfortable telling me that we're not going to move forward? A lot of people feel nervous or impolite, and they disappear, and I'd hate to end up chasing you. And again, it's a disarmingly honest conversation, and it makes them comfortable to come back to you, even make revisions, or at the end of the day tell you no, which is definitely preferable than hiding. The last step of the process is called the post-sell step. The post-sell step is an opportunity for you to deal with buyer's remorse. Have you ever had somebody go ahead and sign a deal with you, and then when you get back to the office to celebrate with the team, you got a voicemail that says, oh, Tim, I appreciate you coming by. Go ahead and hold that order. We don't want to get started right away. We had a couple other things come up. Oh my goodness, painful. And so you can actually deal with that right then and there during your last meeting. When they say, well, we'd like to get started, remember I said being negative, you can go into the post-sell step after they sign the agreement, and I said, well, do you think there's anything that could derail this? You might have an incumbent vendor, the vendor that you've been working with for 3-4 years. How do you think they're going to take this news? How do you think you're going to break the news to them? You can actually invite them into a role play to walk you through how they're going to fire the incumbent vendor. And if you go through those steps, you cover that ground. And like I said, you're diffusing the bomb early before it goes off and derails the whole project. So I would encourage you guys, again, to have those conversations that feel like an 800-pound gorilla. You don't want to touch them. Go ahead and do the counterintuitive thing and broach those subjects. The post-sell step is also an awesome opportunity to ask for permission to ask for referrals. And the way this sounds is, Mr. Prospect, I'm really looking forward to working with you, and I got a question to ask. It makes me a little uncomfortable to share it with you. When we start working with you and doing business together, and let's assume we do a really good job, and I'm not saying we're there yet, would it make you uncomfortable if I gave you a call to ask you maybe once every 6 months if there's anyone in your network or circle of friends that you think might benefit from working with us, might have similar pains to you? So there are a couple components there. I'm going not okay. I'm saying, geez, I'm really uncomfortable asking you this, and that's honest. I'm being honest with them. I feel uncomfortable asking for proposals, and human beings have empathy, and so we can all relate to that. This is an awkward situation. No one likes to ask for proposals, and so that's an effective first step. And then I also said, let's assume we're doing good work for you in 6 months, and we're not there yet. Again, I'm going negative. I'm not being the stereotypical salesperson that says, "Oh my goodness, we're going to do such a great job for you. I can't wait to knock this out of the park." Does that make sense? How these themes are recurring through the process. So I promised to share a couple of details of information. This is my Sandler trainer, Adam, in Austin. They do remote training. If you guys are interested in the content, they can certainly share more of it with you and do remote training as well. This has really transformed our business. Before I started doing this, we were a team of 3 people, and this helped us to grow to a team of 11 people in a span of a year. In fact, I would listen to the materials and I took a risk and started implementing it, and it really had just an incredible effect on our business. So I carved out some time for Q&A and discussion. Wanted to give you guys an opportunity for that. Sure. Doug.
So it sounds like you're not grabbing the RFPs that are floating around out there and responding to those because they already want the proposal. Where's your source of leads without giving too much proprietary?
So it's a great question. The question was, it sounds like we're not responding to RFPs that are floating out around there because they're all going, they're going for their own process, right? They have that salesperson process that or the prospect process that I shared with you in the beginning of the presentation. This one. Where are we getting leads? I gotta say the most powerful leads we've ever received are from a network of relationships that I've been cultivating for a long time with existing customers, and I've found that by going not okay and asking for those referrals, it is a really powerful way of generating leads. I think leads from your network are the most effective by far.
So Tim, like most of us desire to be an agile kind of development shop when it comes to budgeting and pricing, yet proposals sort of dictate a more waterfall model. So how do you, I know you pitch a more assessment, discovery phase first. Once you get past that discovery though, how are you structuring the proposal? Is it agile? Is it waterfall? Is it fixed bid? Is it not to exceed?
That's a great question. So the question was, after you go through the discovery phase, how are we structuring our proposals? Are they more waterfall style proposals, or are they more Scrum and Agile time and materials proposals? We don't do any waterfall work anymore. Do you guys know what waterfall means? It's fixed fee. The specification for the entire project is written out in detail before you start, and we tried really hard to make that work. And I'll give you guys a clue. My number one most effective point in my conversation with prospects in dealing with that, because every prospect assumes that building a website is like building a house, and that you have a spec and you can just build the house. Can't you just do that? And it's not. We all know that it's not like that. And so I say, well, gee, Mr. Prospect, can I share a concern with you? It sounds like a fixed fee approach to this project is absolutely a requirement, and if we're not able to work like that, it's probably a deal breaker. And they'll be intrigued, and they'll say, well, what's the alternative? And you say, well, we found that over 10 or 12 years of doing this work, the most important right for us to defend for our clients, the most important right for our clients to retain, is the ability to change their mind. And my biggest fear with a fixed fee or a waterfall-based contract is it robs you of your freedom to change your mind. How are we going to deal with that when we get into the third or the fourth or the fifth date together, and we start to really get traction, and we start to have ideas about how we can transform your business, where we didn't have those ideas on the first date? How do we deal with that without having to go through the red tape of statements of work and change orders and contracts? My biggest fear is that we wouldn't really be able to bring the value that you're looking for to really make a change in your business. That's how I sell Agile, and how I pitch the merits of Agile without pitching, is I make it about the prospect. I make it about the pain that they will feel if they use waterfall. Does that make sense?
You obviously don't deal with too many municipalities.
I think
I come from an industry, and that's the case. So it's very difficult.
is that time? I think it's time. Thanks, guys.